it appropriate to introduce myself a little bit so everyone knows why I also love speaking about tourism. I love a picture. It was my first photo shoot when I started off being the message architect back in 2019. Funny enough, that's 2019. I spent 20 years in corporate. Yes, I look 20, but I've spent 20 years in corporate. I left corporate in 2025 when I reached Exco in the mining sector. I've dabbled in a couple of sectors, but tourism has been my home. And a lot of people in the room know me for tourism. It's actually where I grew up and learned a lot about corporate. I actually met my darling husband at the South African, the Saki Congress, Saki. That's where I met him 17 years ago. We're happily married now with 2 children, and I sit on the board of Gauteng Tourism. So it always gives me absolute pleasure to speak about tourism, and in particular how we can utilize money wisely. So I will be your program director for the stage, but I will also be your moderator for the first conversation, which is how do governments attract investors, which is a beautiful conversation for me. So I also moderate for the likes of the UN, G20, for Bob Cyril, the Obamas, Paul Kagame, and the likes. So speaking about Africa is a very passionate thing for me because I love to see how everything fits in together. Because a lot of times we separate SDGs from blah, 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 blah. We need to come together and start thinking as a unison in order to move humanity and society then forward. So please help me warmly welcome on stage. No formalities. We're all family. We're all going to get along. We're going to make enough time for all of you to ask them questions. Don't grill them. I love them. Please help me welcome on stage Wrenelle and Enver. You can take a seat there. You can sit wherever. Do you want to come sit next to me? Do you want to sit next to me, Wrenelle? Or you want to sit next to Wrenelle?
Ladies.
Okay.
Is that fine?
Let me get
Musical
out of
chairs.
that bright light. It's such a bright light.
So I don't know if you're all familiar. They are both from South Africa, which is really pleasing to me, my birth country. Enver actually is the CEO of Cape Town Tourism, and Wrenelle is CEO of Wesgro. Very smart province in how they've packaged everything and how they run it for the tourism sector. I'm going to start off with an interesting fact that Wrenelle threw out just now, because it threw me for a full swoop. And I thought, that's actually the starting place. We were just chatting about a report that they've put together, and it calculates the percentage. Enver, don't you want to take off this badge so our photos look so nice?
Okay.
Thank you. If you're able to take it off.
You're
Thank
spoiling
you.
the picture.
Thank you so much. I want to use it one day. And so I was sitting with him on stage. So we were just chatting about the percentage of money, the investors, and where it goes. And Wrenelle was telling me that only 1.16% of investment comes to Africa.
To South Africa.
To South Africa.
9% to Africa.
That's,
Yeah.
doesn't that shock you? And I said to Wrenelle, but why? What can we do as African governments to attract more money? And where's this money going?
Yeah, so good afternoon, Thami. Yeah, so, we'd put together, and we just sort of spoke about this in passing, but we did a piece of work as we prepared to look at how we attract more foreign direct investment into the Western Cape. We thought that it's best to do some work to get an understanding of where the money's coming from, where the money's going to. In fact, we have now got it down to which companies, but I'm not going to be able to recall all of that from memory. But if you look at just to give you like a high level sense, but 1.06% comes into South Africa, 0.06% comes into the Western Cape, and of course 9% into Africa. The money comes from China, the US, the UAE, the UK, and Germany. And the countries that it goes back into is the US, India, the UK, Egypt, Australia. Morocco is 24th, South Africa is 25th, Nigeria is 46th, and Tunisia is 51st. And the sector that is attracting double all of the other sectors is renewable energy. And I think we've seen that. We're seeing that all across Africa, where there's lots of investment into renewable energy, communications, followed by coal, oil, and gas. So that's still quite a big, that sector's still attracting quite a bit of money. Semiconductors, and then real estate. So that's sort of, where the money's going. In Africa, the US is investing in Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, Kenya, Namibia. In China, the Chinese are investing in Egypt, Morocco, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, and Uganda, and it goes on. So it's very, very interesting for us to be able to see where the money's going, to see which companies are investing so that we can target those companies and also package the sectors that are of interest, to some of the investors. But that's just to respond to that interesting statistic that we discussed earlier.
Yeah. And I think it's important to discuss these statistics, because it's all good and well to have a topic that says, how do African governments, but if we don't know the reality, we don't know where we're moving towards. So it's very imperative for me to know these facts. Yes, I wear the Gauteng hat in terms of the board, but I'm here to sell the Western Cape. So forget that. Don't tell them that I did this. But I want to elevate the Western Cape right now. And I'm going to come through to you, Enver, because the Western Cape is really smart in how they utilize local talent and how they utilize communities. And I always said, every single time I come to the CTICC, there's somebody from the local community who's getting, money back. And I think it's a really clever way of attracting, international and international and intracontinental, maybe intracontinental business. So perhaps you guys have the secret sauce. What is the secret sauce? Is it the local business and communities for investors?
So firstly, good afternoon, everybody. There is a secret sauce, but I think it's a sauce that anybody can copy.
So give it to us.
Okay, it's not 11 herbs and spices. What it is, and I think, Wrenelle, to your point is, there's 91% upside. It's again how you look at it, because we're framing it as there's only 9% coming. What I'm looking at is, say, there's still 91% out there. And I think your approach, Wrenelle, is actually based in, let's understand the baseline, and then what that opportunity does. But what we do here in Cape Town, and Wrenelle and the team at Wesgro do phenomenal work, but it's an all of government, all of industry, all of community approach. And I think that's the secret sauce. It's getting everybody involved to collaborate. I think it's firstly about putting egos aside, because unfortunately what we find with politicians, and I can say it, is that politicians build destinations for themselves and not for the people. Politicians make decisions that's expedient in them getting re-elected rather than something that's going to sustain. And when I look at investment could be 20, 50 years. Politicians get recycled every 5 years. And the difficulty for any investor is to figure out who's going to change and when, and then how do I make sure my long-term investment can outlive politicians. And here in the Western Cape, we also understand that from both a tourism perspective and a business perspective, is that you need to collaborate and be apolitical. And the politicians need to also understand that their job is about creating the enabling environment. And that means having the tough discussions up front so that you can set that pathway. And I think what we do have here is that level of understanding is that we can't do it alone. And if you want to get re-elected, you need to have both the business sector and community in the same room. It's a lot more difficult than it sounds. It's a lot more factional. But I think over time, as you start proving projects and investment, and especially on the greenfield side, when it starts to work, then that becomes the formula, and everybody then starts copying that. So for us, there isn't anything special except making sure the right people are in the room, and it's inclusive from the beginning, and that everybody knows what their role is and plays that strength.
I'm going to stay with you because you say some really interesting things. Sometimes investors actually, I don't know if there's an actual clear change or just a shuffle with the same people. And sometimes investors, it's the reverse of what you're saying, is the fact that there is lack of change. It's just shuffling them around that might make them not want to invest. Now, you speak of a rating agency, and you say that rating agencies, could help us in terms of positioning ourselves, whether as a country and a continent. I'm going to to focus a little bit on Africa because, yeah, we're in South Africa, but I want to give it to, give everybody a low-hanging fruit they can utilize. And I think you're of the opinion that we need a new rating agency. Do you want to dabble in that a little bit to say how could having a new rating agency then attract investors for us?
Yeah. So again, I mean, the ecosystem and the systems we will work within is that somebody gives you a rating and that determines your value.
Yeah.
And when we look at it, the existing rating agencies of how they rate Africa,
Yeah.
it's the same way they continue to rate Africa. And then we get in that level of risk, it's keep being applied and we never get out of this virtuous cycle. And then you look at it, that how they apply it at the macro level compared to how they apply it at the Cape Town level, they don't. So you really have that big gap because the traditional models don't work for the world we're in and the world we're going to. And especially when Africa needs the approval of somebody outside to tell you what your value is and how they're going to rate you. And they rate you exactly the same as a developing nation as a developed nation. And that for me, again, it's an old system, continues to perpetuate a certain thing. And what is wrong with Africa actually having its own rating agency that can be a lot more relevant for where we are and then where we're going to. And I think that's part of the thing is that we keep being, it's like your uncle telling you you're only valued at this, but your parents and you know what your value is. And I think it's getting that right. And I'm being as simple as that.
It's such a practical example. That's why I had to giggle as an African child. Yes.
Yeah, because this is the thing for me is that Africa, and I mean, this is my first time at this conference, but what I found is in conversations with people earlier on during the break, people were talking about the same conversations year in, year out.
Yep.
And I go, but that's a systemic issue.
Yep.
And if we don't break the system or reinvent the system, we're going to have the same conversation next year and the next 10 years.
Yeah.
So the most important thing is that what do we need and want for ourselves, and why can't we develop and design it and build it ourselves?
Yeah. And I think this is exactly what I keep punting on every stage. Now, if you've heard me on all the stages today, you'll hear I will say the same thing. It's up to us as individuals on what impact we're going to make. For me, moderating and emceeing is not about the microphone, the pretty dress, and the makeup. We're long past that in this world. I actually create reports for my clients and give them the low-hanging fruit. What they do about it is what they do about it. But we can no longer just have conversations. If we want to move Africa, we all need to be listening to the low-hanging fruits, and in your own corner, we need to actually be implementing that. You speaking about ratings, and the minute you go to ratings, I just think of data and numbers, and I think we can't run away from data and how data really affects how because a lot of the times investors are looking at the data and they want you to make them look good, and that's why they will pick you. And I know you have some really ambitious data that you want to reach. You want to reach 3 million tourists in the Western Cape by 2035. And I'm thinking that's double the current number. What are the key enablers? Because if we can sell that to investors, it might just be an attraction point, not just here in your own country. And it doesn't have to be 3 million for your country.
Yeah, so if I could just take a step back. So in the Western Cape, we have something called the Growth for Jobs strategy.
Yep.
And the Growth for Jobs strategy is looking at tripling tourism and doubling, tripling exports and doubling tourism.
I was going to say that's recorded.
Yes, no, it is doubling tourism. And in fact, we prefer to talk about having 3 million international arrivals by 2035. So that is, I think, quite a bold vision.
It is.
And I think that there's going to be a lot of work that has to go into doing that. I think that tourism is, and I suppose, a sector which is fantastic because it not only enables SMME participation, but it also creates jobs for young people that are just out of matric, if you like, So it's a really great, I suppose, job creator. And downstream, there are lots of multiplier effects. So it's your Uber driver, and all kinds of things. So this is why for Wesgro, and for Cape Town tourism, we are part of the same ecosystem. For us, it's important that tourism is positioned as one of those sectors that we're growing. So if you look at, and we've spent quite a bit of time looking at this, if you look at Japan, Japan has really increased the number of tourists coming in, etc. But this is going to require an all of Western Cape approach. So it is going to mean, and in fact, Khadija, who's sitting over there, is going to be leading a research piece on doubling tourism in the Western Cape. And there's a lot of things that we have to look at. I think it's visas. I mean, we're going to have to increase the number of flights into the Western Cape. We're going to have to increase the use of technology. There'll have to be more SMMEs, more mega events. There's going to have to be domestic marketing. So I think the one thing when we did the benchmarking, what we found is that you can't market the hell out of the place. You've got to do work. And I think part of what we're trying to understand is what is that work that obviously is required. And of course, the Western Cape is off to quite a good start. So if you think about it, in quarter one of FY25, we achieved 121,000 net jobs growth, and this has largely been because of the tourism sector, the BPO sector, and of course last mile delivery. So your kind of e-commerce. In the event space, we moved up from 50th to 35th. We've at Cape Town International, we've seen for the first time ever 3 million two-way passengers. That's the first time in the history of Cape Town International. And of course, we also saw a 6% increase in seat capacity. So all of the indicators are moving in the right direction.
Good.
But we don't have it under control. We've got congestion, So with all of this great stuff comes, there's obviously work that has to be done.
Yeah.
But we are not shy of setting bold targets. And then I think, obviously it's going to require an all of ecosystem approach to try and make it happen.
I'm going to rebut and then we're going to open the floor for questions so we can have time for questions. I often say I really do not believe that as Africa we lack education. I think we have a whole bunch of educated people. I think what we lack in order to move our humanity and society forward is literacy and comprehension and understanding what it is that we're all fighting for together. And you're speaking about this so well. This is what you're touching on, is we need to all play our part in an ecosystem, but we can only play our parts and also know what the governments of Africa want to attract with investors if we all get together and use less jargon, just understandable, granular things that Africa wants to fight for as governments that want to attract investors. And I picked it up even just last week with some. I won't name drop some of the places that I worked at. Is that each organization and association is setting their own targets, and that's where the problem becomes. We throw these things of collaboration. Collaboration has become such a buzzword that most people don't even understand what it means. What we actually lack is integration more than we do collaboration. And I think the Wesgro has done that quite nicely, because you also can't set targets that are different to the province targets, that are different to the country targets, that are different to the continent targets. It's all got to weave in together. How are you doing that really well to ensure that you're shining as Wesgro, but it fits into the broader picture of everything?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost there is I suppose within the Western Cape we're quite lucky. So what we are seeing to some extent is, there's a shift in the world from countries to regional economies. And so I suppose you are seeing the Western Cape as a regional economy beginning to grow. And I think there's a recipe for this.
I love this recipe situation.
Yeah.
You're all listening
Yeah,
carefully?
and it's actually quite simple. I think the first is that there's a vision for the future, which is the growth for job strategy. I think the second is that you've got your province and your local government; they're aligned. So there's, there's some level of alignment. You also have a bureaucracy that is able to implement some of the basic things like water, waste management, sanitation, fixing of roads, all of those things. There is, very importantly, private sector involvement in the Western Cape economy. But more recently, we've seen a very deliberate shift to the government investing in infrastructure. So if you look at the province is investing in roads, in schools, in hospitals. If you look at the city of Cape Town, they've got 120 billion rand pipeline over 5 years. That's in water and sanitation, in public transport, So because you've got all of this investment in infrastructure, what that means is that the private sector starts to feel confident. And we are seeing the private sector respond with private sector investment. I think the Cape Winelands is, obviously one of those private sector entities. The V&A Waterfront, they've got a 20 billion rand investment over 5 years, where they're going to be, upgrading Granger Bay, basically building a second waterfront.
Yeah, they just spoke about it actually next door.
So you're starting to see, and by having, so if you really, really, really want to grow an economy, you have to grow investment. You have to grow gross fixed capital formation. And we've had a look at, in the Western Cape, it's 13%. It needs to be at 20%. So there's work to be done. But I think, the message is that it's going in the right direction.
Yep.
So perhaps when we're sitting here in a year or two's time, we'll be able to see that moving. You see that improving.
They say progress eats perfection for breakfast. I'm going to come to you. I want to ask you a hard question, but I'm going to allow the audience to do. We're going to talk VAT and tax and all those delicious things that, the tax breaks and whatever. We're going to speak about that. But I want to give an opportunity. There we go. We've got a question here. Thank you. Is there another hand so we could already prep the next hand? Great.
Thank you. Question to each of the panelists.
Can I ask you to ask one for the interest of time? So pick which the one you want to ask.
Wrenelle,
Okay.
we talk about doubling tourism in 10 years' time. Are there any red flags, any negative consequences? The Italians don't want a multi-billion-dollar Jeff Bezos wedding. The Spaniards are pushing back against foreigners coming in because it's overtaken their culture. The Chinese are over most of the cities in Australia, and the Aussies can't buy homes for themselves. So any of those concerns in terms of local culture being blanketed out?
Okay.
Yeah, those are concerns. I think there are a couple of concerns. I think it's obviously congestion, housing prices, but I think also very importantly, and I think Enver can talk a little bit to this, is that if you look at investment patterns in the Western Cape at the moment, there is spatial inequality. And so it's going to be really, really important that we start to see a shift to more inclusive investment. And I think that, that is the opportunity. So if the investment isn't inclusive, then I think we're going to, I think the experience will be a negative one.
Yep.
If I can maybe just add on to that.
Please.
So I think one of the things that we do have is that everything that we do is intentional and by design. So we've actually mapped out the future of tourism to Cape Town till 2040. And what you're speaking about is those are the trends and the concerns for us. But the fact that we know that that's going to happen is why our planning shifts in order to accommodate that. Because I think a lot of those destinations you speak about, it was coming on for a long time and they ignored it. Now they're paying the price of the ignorance. What we are now doing is saying, well, the future we're mapping is completely different, but we're taking that into consideration. So a great example is the new Cape Winelands Airport. The question is, why do you need a second airport? In fact, that airport creates a mushroom of activities, new infrastructure, new land for housing, etc. So our landscape begins to shift. The economic value begins to shift instead of it all being in the CBD, which is, again, a spatially designed thing from the past. So I think that's the importance of why everything is actually by design and intentional and the integrated collaboration.
Yeah.
And now that you have said that, I'm going to ask you, people talk about tax breaks and how they, create attractions for countries. And I want to go back to the actual topic. How African governments are attracting investors. What are we missing, Enver? What are we missing?
I think the one thing we're missing is, and I want to be blunt about this, because I think, again, is what we're missing each other.
Yep.
It's a simple thing, is we come into these engagements, we shake hands, we make promises, and we see each other again next year and start the conversation again. And that's also my frustration, not just with conferencing, but in general, is that we're always looking and hunting, but we hunt alone, but we're having the same issues, the same things, and half the time is that we're having that in isolated boardroom conversations. And that's the other problem as well, is we're not actually using the platforms to solve the problems. We like to raise all the problems on a panel, and we've got problems, and it becomes so long, but then next year, that problem list is longer because the world's become more complex.
Yep.
And sometimes it's just stopping and saying, what is the one problem you're going to fix this year, and fix it, and then the next one. And in the Western Cape, we've done that. And I think that's the great thing, is that we also put the egos aside, because there was a lot of concern between Wesgro and Cape Town Tourism. We're playing in each other's spaces, it's duplication of effort, it's taxpayers' money, everybody wants to be the hero. But we actually then were grown-ups and we stood aside and said, actually, we want to achieve the same objectives. We've got resources, but we've got different audiences. If we can synchronize our marketing, we can play a better game, and this is about the citizens winning, then we all win.
Yeah.
And that takes a little bit of maturity, but solving one problem at a time, because everything becomes quite complex and is based on historical information, people that used to be there. And so for me, the real thing is just having real, honest conversation, picking one thing and fixing it.
Yeah.
And then you fix the next one.
Yeah. Sure. I think that brings us to the end of ours, and I'm going to end it on this note, because I'm very convicted by this, and I think it's the reason I do the work that I do, besides the fact that it's a God-given calling. I don't do this out of choice. If I didn't do it, Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior, I'm not saying you must believe in him, I do, would not be happy with me. And you're really naming something for me that's Africans need to we need to start with self-awareness, not just as an organization, but as individuals. And as you were speaking, I started thinking of the Michael Jackson song, which actually has such emphasis. I'm standing with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. And you are, even by closing that way, you're saying, here's the call to action. Don't come here just to be at a conference. Commit to something. To yourself as an individual, say, when I come to a conference, this is the outcome of what I'm going to do, not just from a financial benefit perspective, but from a humanity advancement perspective. Because the truth is, if you really are wanting to fulfill your purpose, the purpose never really has to do about you. It has to do about what you do for everybody else in this universe. So please, a round of applause for Enver and Wrenelle. Y'all are awesome, man. Love you. You can please make your way down. Thank you.
Thank you.